Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. Glad to have us back together for our continuation of our John study. John chapter 8, and we are moving into verse 13. All of this is transpiring after Feast of Tabernacles. The scheme to trip Jesus up in his speech in laying out the trap with the woman caught in adultery. And that we mentioned how that verse 12 really sets the theme for these events and for this chapter in view of everything else that's been discussed in especially 6, 7, and now in here in 8 with the reference to I am the light of the world, or the light of life. And we made connection on how that this again is pointing back to Old Testament references that the Jews should have been comprehending, understanding, and how it is in 6, he makes reference to I am the bread of life, from the bread of heaven. That's connecting back to the manna in the wilderness wandering. Chapter 7, he makes the statement on the last great day of the feast that if any man is thirsty, let him come and drink of me. And that's connection back once again to the wandering in the wilderness and their need of water and God providing for them that from the rock which Moses spoke to and was supposed to speak to again and ended up striking the rock. And now reference to, well, I'm the light of the world and this light of life, and the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire that led them through their wilderness wandering. And all of this giving a full picture of all the provisions that God was making for his people at that time, and now coming to the full need that they have at this stage, and that being not physical, but the spiritual needs that they have. And then in verse 12, setting the contrast of that I am the light of the world, he that followeth me shall not walk in darkness. That Christ is our light. He was their light at this time, guiding them and us as the Old Testament Israelites were led by God through their lives. Wherever he leads, we're supposed to follow. And it was not, when we're thinking about this, it was not always convenient for them to get up and move when the cloud and pillar of fire said it was time to move. They came to certain places to where it's just, okay, this could do well enough. Let's just stay here. Let's just stay camped here. But they weren't allowed to do that. And even in places where it probably wasn't the best for them to be camped at and growing impatient. Well, let's just go ahead and move. We're in a barren place, there's no water, so on and so forth. Let's just pack up and let's just move on. Can't do that. Couldn't do anything until the light moved. And so we're needing to learn that where Jesus does not lead us by his word, then we do not need to go. Where his word allows us to go, then okay, we can go into those areas. But where the word says that we need to stop, okay, that's where we're needing to stop. But as we were discussing this in class last week, and how that it is, here's Jesus saying that I'm the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness. And yet here are people witnessing that very light in their presence, and yet they're still walking in darkness. And so this takes us back into John chapter 3, and the very thing that Jesus said to Nicodemus on how it was the condemnation had come into the world, and that condemnation was that light had come into the world, but men loved darkness rather than light. And it all comes down to a trading up of what it is that you are wanting to gain. So a lot of people think, well, if I'm over here in the darkness and I'm over here working in the shadows, then I'm going to be able to gain more because I'm going to be able to get away with more. And that if I'm over here in the light, I can't get away with as much because, well, okay, people can see me. And they're able to view what it is that I'm actually involved in doing. But that's the game, that's the trick that sin plays on us, to where we think that, okay, this is us actually getting away with stuff, when in reality we're not. That darkness, or there's freedom over here in this darkness, but in fact there's freedom over here in the light, because if you're operating in the light, nobody's suspicious of you, nobody's watching you, and you have more liberty to be able to go and do what it is that you are ultimately wanting to do. And that's going to end up being a statement that Jesus is going to make around verse 30 and 31 as he continues to teach this crowd. So, he's done all of these things. Jesus has done all these things in the sight of these Jews, and now he makes this statement in their presence. How would you think they would respond? Or put yourself in this situation. You see all these things unfold. Jesus makes this statement. What would be your response?
Well, he's saying, I am the light of the world. So he's challenging them to put their faith in him as somebody who's going to save them, whereas before they're like, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Why should we follow you?
Okay.
So that's one starting point.
Okay. So, what's your thought? So here we have this transition of all these things Jesus has been doing, to where in these previous events they're questioning him and trying to lay traps and all these different kinds of things, and there should be this shift that just ends up taking place, and especially with what he did with the woman caught in adultery, and how that they were wanting to put her to death unjustly, and Jesus steps up to protect her. And it's like, okay, wow, that's the kind of teacher, master we should be wanting. Not somebody that's going to abuse us, but somebody that's actually going to stand up and protect us with the law. So, go ahead.
Just go back to your question, what are they thinking when they get this? When they hear Jesus say this, well, he that follows me, they're not following him. And so therefore they are walking in darkness. It's kind of the same thing that he's saying with brothers
Yeah.
in the beginning. So that was my own comment.
Okay, so there's a bit of sliding or cutting that's going on here by inference of implication that, okay, I'm making the statement to you because you are in fact walking in darkness and not in the light. So that can go one of two ways, either just making them further indignant, further digging in their heels, well, I don't like what you're saying, or Acts chapter 2, cut to the heart and, all right, I am doing this, I don't want to anymore, so let me follow.
It was pretty much along the same lines. Is how would we act today, like standing there? Well, it depends on where your allegiance is. Is it with the devil, or is it with Jesus? And most of the time, even with brethren, you can see that you bring forth their fault, and they want to hide that. They want to stay in the shadow, hide that, and go, no, my hands are clean, Pilate. And so wherever you go, whether that's in the world or in the brotherhood, it's just falling back into the same old habit that no matter how much you shine your light on, people are going to want to stay in darkness.
So doesn't it go down to the soil?
Yeah.
So here's Jesus providing another example of a situation of soil. The soil wasn't ready.
Yeah.
Just didn't want to take the seed.
Yep. And with the connection on bringing in the connection with the soil, you plant seed, it's got to go into the right soil, but what does the seed also need to be able to grow?
Water.
All right, water.
Sun. Light.
Light.
Photosynthesis.
So here's light being brought into the picture with the Word of God being planted in there, and that's another element, another source that has to be there for that Word to grow. And in recognition of that light source and being able to follow Him. Full commitment. All right. So good thoughts, and
But you're wrong.
ultimately, I think Jordan Reese's thoughts are the ones that pan out in the next verse. They're back to their same old tricks. It's the same game. The Pharisees therefore said unto him, Thou bearest record of thyself, thy record is not true. And all you can do is just shake your head. Just how long are you going to continue to be this way? So here's another situation of, we got you. And it's petty. It is so petty in view of everything that has just transpired with the woman taken in adultery. You have done something that was going to wrongly condemn a person and in this person, or actually end up ending this person's life. And now you're wanting to nitpick about this. So here's a perfect illustration: a beam in one eye and a mote in the other. And even with what they're trying to catch him in, by them trying to say, well, now you're just giving your own testimony. According to the law, it has to be by 2 or 3 witnesses. We already know that they do not care about the law. But here they are again trying to give pretense, and they're trying to pretend. And even Jesus himself has addressed this very point. Back in John 5:31, he starts out this long conversation with them about, if I bear witness of myself, my witness is not true. So here once again, they're playing this game, and they're trying to maneuver, and they're trying to falsely represent or misrepresent what it is that Jesus is doing. But, as usually is the case, Jesus has an answer for this too. In verse 14, Jesus answered and said to them, Though I bear record of myself, yet my record is true. For I know whence I came and whither I go, but ye cannot tell whence I come and whither I go. So Jesus gave his own testimony. And he gave testimony of himself about who he is. But he has, number one, he has the right to do this because he is divine. He is in fact deity, he's God. And by him making the statement here, though I bear record of myself, yet my record is true, for I know whence I came and whither I go. What's that statement? It's not necessarily an implication, but it's a callback to John chapter 1. And ultimately, it's a callback to what he's been promoting and teaching in front of them this whole entire time. I know whence I came and whither I go.
Again?
No, not the crucifixion.
I think it's referencing his deity.
Okay. And in his deity, how is it that he ends up here on earth?
Well,
think
he
it's the-
had,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, he had a beginning as a man. So
Mhm.
he has a beginning and an ending, and that's what he's saying there.
Okay.
I was just gonna say he came from heaven, he's gonna be going back there.
Okay. So in coming from heaven, did he come on his own will?
He had asked permission to go out.
It's all from because God sent him.
Okay, the idea of sending. So if you're somebody who is sent and you come with a message, is that message your own?
No.
No, you're sent on behalf of somebody else. So it goes into the Corinthian letter where Paul writes about the apostles as being ambassadors. And also the Hebrew letter where Jesus is referenced as being the chief apostle. Well, what does apostle mean?
Messenger.
All right, a messenger, one who is sent. So by him making this statement, though I bear record of myself, where's his record coming from? Heaven. It's not his own. And thus that's the means by which he is justified and how his record is true. He has a message that was not his own, but commanded by God, and Jesus was sent by the Father to come and declare this message. And it just so happens that the message is about himself. So, as we mentioned, John chapter 5, what has Jesus already taught to them and laid out as evidence to how his record is also true?
By his works.
All right, by his words.
Works.
Oh, works, okay. So works are in there. But but if you remember to our class, we put the works into a group with some other individuals as well. So as we said, if you're going to declare something, it has to be declared by, if it's going to be confirmed,
By miracles.
well, not just miracles.
The government, no,
No.
but higher ups.
Nope.
By witnesses.
Witnesses. So in John 5, what does Jesus bring before the audience so as to prove that his word and his testimony is true? He brings witnesses. John, the immerser, was a witness. Father in heaven was also a witness. The words that he taught, the miracles that he performed, all of those things are being mentioned in John chapter 5. Now here we are in John 8, and they're wanting to play this game of, well, okay, you're just out here speaking on your own accord. See how quickly people forget things? We move a few days. Well, actually, it's not a few days because, where was it? Was it between 5 and 6? We said it was at least 6 months because we moved.
Between 6 and 7?
Yeah, because we moved from one feast to the next. But even from that, from that standpoint, 6 months really isn't that long of a time.
Christmas.
Yeah. But here they are, and they're still trying to do the same old stuff. And Jesus has already presented, no, I'm not alone in what I'm doing. But then also, when we are thinking about these things and like these arguments and these traps that they're trying to lay out for him, and then the statement that Jesus makes, for whence I came and whither I go, but ye cannot tell whence I come and whither I go. Why couldn't they tell where he came from and where he was going to go?
Because it's spiritual,
Okay,
and they're not thinking spiritually.
okay, that's good. And that's exactly what the next verse says. The very reason why they're not comprehending this and they're not getting it together and they are behaving the way that they're behaving with the Messiah, the Son of God, the Savior, Jesus says, ye judge after the flesh. And there's the problem. By trying to use the wrong standard in judging, in measuring, in discerning, they're using the wrong measuring tool. And that's what creates the problem for anyone trying to properly understand this book. And not just the bare elements that are written on the page, but getting down to the deeper meanings and the deeper understandings, as Solomon would write in the Proverbs, the dark sayings. These things that are needing to be revealed. You cannot go to this book with a fleshly way of thinking and come out of it gaining what it has for you to possess. And then with the statement that Jesus makes, so he says to them, ye judge after the flesh, but then Jesus says, I judge no man. What are we supposed to do with that?
Well,
Okay. All right. So this overall context is at play, to where Jesus is laying before them, I'm not going to judge you as you would judge me. So it fits into this context of the standard also. You judge after the flesh, but I don't judge like that. And then, going back into what Jamie just mentioned, to where the testimony is not mine. So what about the judgment? Even that is coming from the Father. So Jesus is going to judge. But he's not going to judge with their ruler. They have a purely physical, carnal way of viewing this life. And even like in all of this, as we've gone through our studies, we've made mention of the fact on how it is that they continuously, not only how they look at what Jesus says, but even how did they look at the law that was under the Old Testament?
Came from Moses.
Huh?
Came from Moses.
Okay. That law came from Moses. Oh, so you think that came from a man? And even in the different interactions that we've looked at with them and Jesus, they have constantly referred to him as a man.
Which is weird because if they're just following Moses, Moses says there's a prophet coming like me, so why wouldn't they just, be ready to listen to this other prophet that Moses says is coming?
Yeah.
Even though we all know it's God, but if Moses said it, because they're retarded.
And it goes back to the wrong kind of leadership being brought in. Here are people that are using Moses incorrectly while claiming to give honor and praise to the man. But it's all just lip service, and you can see it all the way through to where now, as Jordan mentioned, here we have the prophet that Moses was talking about, and they're not wanting to listen. Well, then that shows to me you really do not care about Moses either. So here's the struggle that they're having. Only saw Jesus as a man and not deity, and because of that, they did not understand the truth. And so here's the danger for all of us. That when it comes to this life and wanting to know truth, if I make up my mind about what I want truth to be before I even go through and study it out, then I will never learn what the truth actually is. I will bend the truth so that it fits to my preconceived ideas. And Jesus dealt with that in Matthew 5. You've heard it said of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that if a man looks upon a woman to lust after her, committed adultery already with her in his heart. His reference to, well, you've heard it said of old time, is to their physical teachers. Here are these people that have come in and they've manipulated the law to where it's, well, yeah, you can't actually go through and do this action, but now Jesus is having to come through and set out clarification that no, you're not even supposed to be looking. But that's what they've done to the law. Well, yeah, we won't commit adultery, but if you want to look, okay, you can look. Yeah, don't commit murder, but if you've got hatred towards your brother, we can make an excuse for that. And they are doing this all the way through because they're wanting to judge after the flesh.
And we see that displayed before us,
Yep.
especially this last year.
Yep, all around. In and out of the church. So when I want the Bible to teach a certain way, because that is how I want to live, and that's what I want it to say, then we'll be right here with them. No longer judging righteous judgment, but we'll be judging after the flesh, just as they did.
This reminds me of just side note, the denominational world out here, as it's saying Jesus doesn't judge. They lump all the judging together. They lump, like, they take the whole thing and they lump it all together. Well, we can't judge now because, Jesus, not even Jesus judges, and the woman at the well, and all these excuses that they make. But it also goes with baptism, to where they go, well, I was baptized,
Yeah.
not understanding that, no, you weren't baptized for the right reason. Oh, so you're saying I have to be baptized again? Do you know how retarded that sounds? And so it makes you feel dumb for the teacher of teaching the truth, because they come up with these little excuses. But that shouldn't stop you, because right here, there's a difference between judging according to the flesh and spiritual judging. There's a difference between being dunked, taking a bath, going swimming, and a spiritual aspect of literally being baptized. So that was standing out to me, is how, yes, the denominational world does it, but also the brethren, where it's, no, we can't judge, that's wrong. And the baptism, like, everything's the same. Even if you're baptized as an infant, we can let that go. So that's what I had.
And that connection of, okay, you've been dunked, but so moving it from the denominational viewpoint and dealing with our own brethren, okay, you might be in this thing and you might be involved in this realm, but that doesn't make you of this realm. And that's even going to become a discussion that Jesus is going to have in this chapter, because who are the Jews going to try to bring up once again to try to protect themselves and defend themselves? Abraham. They always want to fall back to Abraham. And it's like, yeah, you might be of Abraham's seed, of Abraham's lineage. That doesn't make you holy. That doesn't make you righteous. And that doesn't mean that you're going to go to heaven. So the same element with water baptism. Okay, you may be baptized, and it was for the remission of your sins. That doesn't mean you're going to heaven. If you are like this, if you are still very much fleshly and not walking spiritually. But we'll save that for when we get there. So what this does, once again, let's put this back in connection with the cloud and with the fire. And we just think about judging life, going through life, making decisions based upon fleshly desires and fleshly wisdom. Where would Israel have landed if they had made the light go where they wanted? Okay, we're not following God, but we're going to dictate and we're going to control where this light actually takes us.
Back to Egypt with the radishes.
Oh, okay. We don't have to wonder too much because they say it. Let's just go back to Egypt. If we had our say and we got our way, we would not be out here in this wilderness. We would just go back to Egypt. And then, so even before you get to their wandering in the wilderness, and so granted, you cannot really trust the maps that are in your Bibles, and especially when it comes to the Exodus path that's in there. But when you actually figure out and you lay it out as to where God is leading them before they pass through the Red Sea, that was not a smart way to go. And typically, if you were involved in that kind of travel, nobody would go that way. Fleshly judgment would tell you, oh, you're wanting to leave Egypt? You don't go this way. And yet that's the way God had them go. And it even tells us in the text of Exodus that it was such a bad idea that when Pharaoh heard where they were, it further emboldened him to go after them, because he knew they'd be sitting ducks. So even when you're thinking about from that aspect and just the very way that God took them out, none of this makes sense. Why not go this way? Why not? So in fact, in Exodus, Numbers, it talks about trying to pass through Edom and taking the King's Highway. The King's Highway is what it sounds like. This is the way that the king would travel. What kind of road do you think that is?
A road.
It's a road. Well maintained, well taken care of, easy to travel over. Here we got this cloud and this fire leading us out here in the wilderness where nobody's out here traveling with us. It'd be a lot easier if we went over here on this highway. But again, the text tells us that even though fleshly wisdom would say this is the easiest way, God's wisdom lays out for us that He knew that if they had gone that way, what would have happened?
Been sitting ducks again.
They would have been sitting ducks again because they would have gotten in trouble. They would have gotten in a fight right away, and they wouldn't have been able to handle it.
So what I was thinking is, it's the King's Highway. It's going to be very protected.
Okay. So you see where our thinking runs us into conflict with God's thinking? And how that easier is not always the best? Easy presents its own problems and its own dangers, just as much as the hard and the difficult way. Now, in thinking about them in that aspect, that would be just like us trying to make the Bible teach what we want. Where would that get us?
Not with God.
All right. It would put us back in the bondage of sin. It would create its own problems and its own issues, just as it did for Israel. And even for Israel, so a prime example of God saying, get up and go, and they didn't want to go. They were on the very cusp of the promised land. And God said, okay, it's time to get up and go and take it. And they said, no, don't want to. And the problems that created. Judging after the flesh. There's giants in the land, we're but grasshoppers. What are we supposed to do? And not thinking spiritually in view of everything that God had already done. And look at what that decision produced. Died in the wilderness, didn't even get to go in. Now granted, they were taken care of while they were in the wilderness. And even with that, repentance and having their souls protected, okay, they could go on to paradise, but just the idea that this is everything that our life is about, is getting to this point, and then we're going to die before we can get there. It's a difficult idea. And then the very idea you're having to put your children through that. And then your grandchildren are having to go through this because of what? Because of the decisions you made. So all of this is trying to point them towards just getting think outside of yourself. This isn't just about you. You're not the ones in charge here. There's somebody greater. And He's trying to lead you and He's trying to guide you. And though it may not particularly make sense now, but if you give it some time, eventually you'll end up seeing it. It's like, oh, wow, okay. This was the way that it was needing to go. And yeah, might have been difficult, might have been mighty inconvenient, but man, look at where we are now. And just having them to relinquish that position that they put themselves in and give it back to the person who's supposed to have it. and that being God, and God actually being in their presence. So verse 16, Jesus says, "And yet if I judge, my judgment is true, for I am not alone, but I and the Father that sent me." So everything that we discussed before, Jesus himself uses as an argument in front of them. I'm not judging in accordance with your standard. And even though I am judging, my judgment is true because I am not alone. But it's I and the Father that sent me. The judgment that he is making is based upon the Father's judgment. Now, just to show you, just to lay it out on how these people are behaving, what we have being presented to us in this text, if we were to bring it into our realm, this would be like Jordan coming to Reese and saying to Reese, "Okay, Dad says you need to sweep the shop because you did not do what he said." And going back to that time frame and being siblings, what's the usual response that would come from the younger brother to the older brother?
You're not Dad.
"Okay, you're not Dad. You can't punish me." But is that what's going on? Is Jordan the one trying to punish? No. The punishment is coming from the authority. But what's the game that we try to play? So as to,
Shoot the messenger.
You shoot the messenger.
Literally.
Stab him with the pencil.
You make it about the person coming and bearing the message. And that's what they're doing here. Jesus is following the judgment of God and submitting himself to that will, and the decisions that he is making are based on what the Father says. But you see, they do not want to make that connection. Because if they make that connection, then they know that they're condemned. He's got them dead to rights. But if we can do this petty stuff and raise these little arguments and ultimately act like children, then we can somehow soothe ourselves and protect ourselves from what the truth actually is. And again, this stuff still goes on today. We ultimately are just big children in adult bodies. Because you come along, you try to present to somebody, well, hey, this is actually what God says, and if you don't fix this, you're not going to heaven. Well, who are you to judge me? Who are you to condemn me? I'm not the one that's going to condemn you. I know the one who's going to condemn you, and I know what he has said. But you see, if we can bring all this down to man's level and a fleshly level, well, that's just your opinion, that's just your personal belief, yada, yada, so on and so forth. Nobody has to change. I can just keep on doing what it is that I'm wanting to do. But that's not going to cover you. Because these are the judgments and the commandments of God. Not Micah, not of the Church of Christ, or of anybody else. Jesus states in verse 17, "It is also written in your law that the testimony of two men is true. I am one that bear witness of myself, and the Father that sent me beareth witness of me." And so what we have being presented here also is this level of fellowship that Jesus has with God, with the Father. and that the decisions that Christ is making, they were not made on his own, based upon human wisdom. But then also, question with verse 18, how is it that the Father bears witness of him? So I'm one that bear witness of myself because, yeah, he's sent from God, came from heaven. He's deity. And how is it the Father bears witness of him also?
Because he's a different being.
Because he's man, but he's doing the will of the Father.
Okay. That's true. And what else? Think back to Nicodemus.
The signs Jesus is doing.
Okay. We know that you are a teacher sent from God, because no man can do these miracles except God be with him. All of these things laid out in front of them. You should be getting this. And to a large degree, they did. They just did not want to obey. So once again, Jesus is laying out this evidence in front of them. I'm not alone. I am the Father that sent me. I am one that bear witness of myself, and the Father that sent me beareth witness of me. And instead of paying attention to the main thrust of the information, and this is, so once again, we're learning about character and how it is that we're dealing with people and the kind of people that we're going to run into. We know, we can tell from this interaction that they are not listening. And the way that we know that is because they're just going through and picking out little things so as to build another argument right after a defense that he's made. Verse 19, then said they unto him, where is thy Father? Seriously? You're not even going to stick with the argumentation on how this actually started. Now you're wanting to run off over here and start asking questions about, well, where is your Father? Number one, it's pretty obvious as to where my Father is, because Jesus had no earthly father. Now, in the legal civil sense, Joseph is his quote-unquote father. But as far as his actual father, it's God in heaven. There's no getting over that. No getting around that. But yet, here they are once again. And it's interesting to note that they do not ask, who is your Father, but where is your Father? Because in asking, to ask the who of it is too direct of a question that would lead them into a lot of trouble. And again, they know who he's claiming that his Father is. He's claiming that his Father's God, and that's what has them upset back in John 5. Healing on the Sabbath day and making himself equal with God. So they already know this claim of, well, okay, we've heard about the who, so now we're going to play this game about, well, where is he?
How is he doing?
Yeah, it's just like, that doesn't change the claim. Jesus answered, ye neither know me nor my Father, for if ye had known me, ye should have known my Father also. Once again, we have Jesus making this very strong statement of condemnation against a Jewish audience by saying to them clearly and bluntly, you don't even know. And yet here they are, religious, involved in religious observance, going through ritual and tradition, upholding these things that are found in the Scriptures. But Jesus has to lay out to them, you don't even have a clue. And that's the way that it is to a large degree today. People going through ritual, going through customs, and going through traditions, and having a very bare surface level introduction to God, and they want to think that they know who He is. But in our very first study, we mentioned on how that it is with how John is writing this information. That's why we have this information recorded for us, is because Jesus came to really introduce us to God. Jesus is God in the flesh, God among us. And so if you want to know somebody, you got to spend time with them. And here are people during this time frame, and they are literally able to spend time with God. And it should have been an eye-opener to them of, well, okay, we've heard a lot of different people talk about God, and they all have a different view and outlook on who God is. And then Jesus shows up, and it's, we never knew you. That's how it is now. So many people think that they know who Jesus is, but then you start taking them to different sections in the gospel accounts, like what we're doing, and it's just like, wow. You never knew this about Jesus. Okay, you don't know Him. And therefore you don't know the Father. And for Jesus to say this to a group of Jews should really be a scary situation for us as members of the Lord's church. That what's being said to them can very easily be said to us. You don't really know who Jesus is, and therefore you really don't know the Father. Because even a lot of our brethren, they're just working with a basic surface level idea of who God and Jesus is based upon what they hear for not even 2 hours, a few hours on a Sunday. And even then, not even questioning, well, is the representation that I'm being given of Jesus actually the right thing and the real thing? But then when we study this idea, this section, this verse, we really need to think about this question from the standpoint of, and when they're asking the question of where is thy Father, they ultimately are asking the question, well, who is your Father? And so even with us sitting in this assembly today, we need to ask ourselves this question: who is my Father? Because when the right one ends up being your Father, that's going to bring about a certain result. Because even in the physical realm, sons take on the attributes of fathers. Look like fathers, behave like fathers. And so depending on what kind of father you have, it's going to produce certain results in life. Well, the same is the case when it comes to the spiritual. And that when you look and you study with Old Testament Israel, there were two different groups inside of Israel. Israel was made up of fleshly people and spiritual people. And the fleshly people were satisfied with being Abraham's seed. We are Abraham's seed, but we're not taking on any of the characteristics of our father Abraham. And Jesus is going to lay that out to them in this section. But then you have spiritual Israel that were not only Abraham's seed in the flesh, but as Paul would put in Romans chapter 4, you had those that would walk in the steps of their father Abraham. They had the same kind of faith that Abraham had. And so they lived differently. And you could easily tell the difference between the two. Well, same thing goes on in the church today. You're going to have two groups inside of the church. Those that are fleshly and those that are spiritual. The ones that are purely satisfied in going through physical elements, being baptized, so on and so forth, but not actually taking on the spiritual application of Christianity, and that means, okay, we're new creatures. The old man is dead. I'm now walking differently. They don't want to do that. But then you have those that are willing to be spiritually reborn, born from above, and that they take on these characteristics that Jesus has, and that they fully submit. Not going to walk after the flesh, not going to walk after sight or by sight, but walk by faith. And that once again, he states, if you had known me, you should have known my Father also. That they could be involved in a system for so long, which granted was laid out in types and shadows, to where the full comprehension was not there yet. But yet all of it pointed towards something that was coming. And then to have the very thing that they are supposed to be looking for right in front of their eyes. And they didn't spot it. And it's not because they couldn't, it's just simply that they wouldn't. They had no desire to follow after Christ and what he was showing to them, because it meant they would have to change. The whole system would have to be rebuilt. And they just didn't want to do it. In verse 20, these words spake Jesus in the treasury as he taught in the temple. And there's the result. No man laid hands on him, for his hour was not yet come. So once again, we have public teaching and public correction. In verse 21, then said Jesus again unto them, I go my way, and ye shall seek me, and shall die in your sins. Whither I go, ye cannot come. Here are a group of people, and they're seeking for the Messiah. They knew he was supposed to come, and they wanted him to come, but they're looking for him in the wrong place and in the wrong way. Judging after the flesh. And in judging after the flesh, they never found what they were looking for. In verse 21, just plainly lays it out for them. This means that they will die in their sins and be lost for eternity. And how many people are in the same situation today as these folks here? They have a false hope of being with God when they die. Well, where is he going? Well, he's going back home to the Father. And because they will not seek him correctly, they will not go where he's going. That happened to them. That's what's going to happen to people today. But even as we're thinking about this in the context of when it's being spoken, this was spoken to people that were already in covenant relationship with God. And that if they, having these covenants and going through this religious system, could find themselves in this kind of condemnation, then what about us? And it all goes back to, what are we looking for? That's the question Jesus raised to his audience when he asked them about John the Immerser. What did you go out to see? What were you hoping to find? Well, a lot of people had built up a lot of things in their mind as to what they wanted to see. Well, guess what? That's fleshly judgment. You're not going to see that. And that's what people do with religion. That's what they do with Christianity. It's even what our own brethren do with the Lord's church. Well, what are you seeking? What is it you're wanting to find with church? And it gets manipulated and it gets perverted to where they're no longer seeking what it is that Christ is wanting us to seek. Get caught up in the material, physical, and neglect the spiritual. And Jesus just flat out says, where I'm going, you cannot come. Frightening, but it should be a wake-up call. That if we're not careful and we're not allowing the Word of God, the words of Jesus to guide us and to lead us, we'll start making our own way. And we're not needing to do that. Throughout the Old Testament, the warning always was, do not depart on the left hand or to the right. Is it stay the course? Yeah.
So Mother always said.
Stay on that straight and narrow way. But it's not always easy.
Is that what he was doing?
That's just what we got to do if we're going to be able to make it. In verse 22, 23, he'll continue to build on the fleshly problem that they're having, but we'll have to save that for next week. So any thoughts or questions on 15 through 21? judging after the flesh.
We just gotta hammer it home that if the soil refuses to take the seed, then there's nothing we can do. Because even Jesus is laying it out for them, and it just comes. You mom were talking about this yesterday or whatever, but it just comes down to that. We can give it to them, we can explain it to them, and they might even get it.
Mhm.
But it's going against that conviction. Like they have to cross that bridge of conviction of, oh, we did kill the Lord and Savior Jesus, or no, I don't, and that's what we just have to throw the seed, because it just comes to that point. They can either, once they get it, they have to cross that bridge of conviction or not. So that's, for us, we just have to throw the seed, because not even Jesus could turn all of the Pharisees.
Yep.
Eventually, some of them did change. But that's it. For application for us.
Well, I
One
think-
of the applications.
I think the other thing with regard to that and an addendum to the seed is sometimes we have a habit, well, I know I do, the habit of thinking, what more can I say? But we have it continuously displayed for us that Jesus is saying everything. He's the perfect spokesperson, and yet people are not swayed. And that's a hard thing to just get past.
Agreed. All right, anybody else?